In a lot of theological circles, this takes the form of pitting the Son against the Father, like God the Son against God the Father. The Son placated the Father because the Father was wrathful and angry, so Jesus had to come down and die, and now the Father can love us. The reality is the love of God the Father is the motivating factor that drives the plan of redemption. And it's the same love of the Son and the same love of the Spirit. In the most famous verse in the Bible, for God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that's God the Father. So it's God the Father's love that drives the whole plan of salvation. The whole covenant of redemption is initiated in light of the Father's love.
Hey, brother, do you still believe in one another?
Welcome to episode 479 of the Reformed Brotherhood. I'm Jesse.
And I'm Tony, and this is the podcast with ears to hear. Hey, brother.
Hey, brother. We've been famously in the parable of the lost son, or the lost sons, or the father. Everybody knows this. And today, on this episode, we're at least going to close out our conversation about Luke chapter 15. And I think everybody should just imagine that this parable is like a grand stone archway that's being constructed in such a way that it has to bear its own weight. And the father in this archway is the keystone. He's the load-bearing character in this whole parable. He's not just like a sentimental figure. He's a revelatory figure. He shows us what God is like toward returning prodigals and toward resentful older brothers. And Jesus uses this to fire up our understanding of the kingdom and the gospel, and also to fire up the scribes and Sadducees. So we're talking about the Father on this episode, and he is rightfully the culminating character here. He is the keystone. So we're going to get to arch building, keystones, load-bearing stuff, all the engineering that you wanted us to talk about in this parable. But first, we got to do that thing. We just got to do it, Tony.
Yeah, we do.
It's affirmations and denial. So are you, and your excitement is palpable, are you affirming or are you denying against?
I'm denying something tonight. It's a little bit heavy. We haven't, and we don't typically wade into political discourse or what's going on in politics. That's just not really our lane. And that's not that there's anything wrong with shows that do, or that there's anything wrong with Christians who want to be involved in political discourse. It's just not really our thing. But, I grew up in Minneapolis, and I have family still in Minneapolis. And I was texting with my sister the other day, who lives and works right in downtown Minneapolis. And so I think what I'm denying is not necessarily anything related directly to ICE or to the political positions. What I see online is that there is a bifurcation. There seems to be, and I think this is probably just the nature of online discourse. So I don't think this is necessarily the way it is in the real world. But what I see online is there seems to be sort of progressive leaning Christians who are totally anti-ICE. This is the worst thing ever. Nobody who's being arrested and deported deserves it, and all of the ICE people here. But that's one perspective. And then what I tend to see on the other side is ICE is like God's righteous warriors, and everyone who they scoop up, it deserves it no matter what, and they can do no wrong. And I am not making a commentary. If you want to ask me directly in privately what I think about it, I'm happy to have a conversation. I'm not doing that right now. I have no commentary on the legality of the deportations or the legality of the way they're conducting arrests. I'm just not interested in talking about that on a podcast. But what I do think is challenging, and I think we need to think about as Christians, is there is a real human cost associated with what's going on. And there are lives that are affected, and there are people who are scared. I think where this really hit me is I just texted my sister to tell her that I was praying for her and get sort of a general check-in. And she shared with me, and I'm sure that this is not unique to her context, she shared with me that she has colleagues at her place of employment who are American citizens, born in the U.S., born to citizens. Like, there's no question about their citizenship. And they are afraid to leave their home and afraid to go to work. And Again, I'm not making any commentary on whether there's illegal things going on. I'm not even making any commentary on whether or not I think it's reasonable for them to be afraid. The fact of the matter is they are afraid to leave their homes. And some of those people are probably afraid to leave their homes because they feel like ICE is going to harass them. Other people are probably afraid to leave their homes because there's a lot of violence and a lot of unrest going on. But in either case, I think we as Christians should look at this and see that there are a lot of hurting people who need Jesus, and there are a lot of people who are scared. And there's a lot of people who are suffering real concrete harm all across the whole spectrum of this situations. So as Christians, I think we should be praying that God's will would be done. And God does not delight in suffering for suffering's sake. He doesn't delight in people being hurt or harmed or even emotionally scarred. Um, we have sometimes this picture of God who's so abstract that those things that they don't bother him, and that's true from like a strictly theological sense. But we also have to reconcile what the scripture says and what the picture it paints. At the very least, God reveals himself under the language of grieving injustice and grieving misery and grieving sorrow and suffering. So we should be a people that reflects that, although there are times when those things are necessary, both in the life of a Christian and then also as a result of sin. We shouldn't be reveling in it and being excited about the fact that this is happening. So I might get some heat for this, and I guess I don't really care all that much. But I think this polarized, like, every person who's scooped up by ICE is a terrible, awful criminal, and it doesn't really matter what their story is. And then anyone who's scooped up by ICE is just a total victim, and it doesn't really matter what their story is. Like, neither of those poles are true for most of the situations. The stories probably drift towards one side or another, and they're not all like right in the middle. But the truth is that the world and life is complex, and we shouldn't treat it as though it's simple. It really is not in most cases.
It's a good reminder that there are places that are not here, that there are people, as you said, that are experiencing a different kind of suffering. And you're right, of course, if we're to be the kind of people that even ourselves are taking on our lips that we want to follow our Lord Jesus Christ, then the example that he gives for us is to think about, to identify with, and to come alongside in prayer for those that are suffering. I think also for prayer for Christians in those communities to be strong and to exemplify the love of Christ in ways that they can. And so, of course, I immediately go to Isaiah 53. And that's also about really the ubiquity of suffering in our world, but this massive desire on the part of God in an unreserved way to identify with that kind of suffering. So in verse 4, the famous verse is, surely our griefs he himself bore. What a statement, right? Like the grief that we're talking about now, that we're not alone, the grief of those who are in the midst of this kind of traumatic sorrow, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastising for our peace fell upon him, and by his wounds we are healed. All of us, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way, but Yahweh has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. And who doesn't have iniquity? All of us do. So this reminder that we serve a God who can parse out and understand this suffering the best, who is both just and justifier. And what is left to us then is to submit to him, to worship him, to pray that in that great grief that our world experiences, that he himself would draw close as he has already promised to do, and that his spirit would come with both comfort and conviction to bring all his children onto himself, even in difficult situations like this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, on that note, Jesse, are you affirming or denying something? There's no good transition there.
No, it's heavy. I hear you. And the problem is partly in our culture right now is you can't understand all both our desires right now to be measured in what we say, because maybe we have opinions, maybe we don't. But the bottom line is I'm not sure that opinions even help that much in this type of situation because of the complexities involved here. And all I think that's left to say is just that it's hard. And I wish there was more I could do. I wish this kind of thing wasn't happening. And I understand too, I'm not naive enough to think that's not just happening here, but all over the world, these kind of things take place at any given day. And if we are so fortunate not to have to contend with them, then we are just very fortunate. And we all take that as blessing. It doesn't mean that we don't have a responsibility to pray and to, I think, in some ways, try to identify with that suffering, if only through our prayers, reminding ourselves that, like you said, we all need a savior. We all do, all of us, you and me, and all those involved in this. It's absolutely necessary. It's part of what we're talking about tonight, right? We're saying, like, Lord God, as Father, come in your mercy, come quickly, come and heal, come and restore, come and make right, come and judge, come and comfort. That's what we're asking the Father to do. So it's heavy, but we need those kind of affirmations and denials from time to time. So I appreciate you being willing to bring that into the chat.
Yeah.
You want my affirmation?
Yeah, I feel like I can't. I mean, I'll be honest. Like, I think people might be surprised at my overall perspective on this. And again, I'm not going to get into it here. And I really am being honest when I say, like, if you want to reach out to me privately, I'm not shy about my perspective on this. I'm happy to share it, but I think it's just heavy. And I felt the same way about this during the George Floyd riots. Like,
right.
I grew up in Minneapolis, and, it's been a long time since I've been super familiar with Minneapolis, and I grew up on the east side of the cities, which is the St. Paul side. So even saying I grew up in Minneapolis is not super accurate. But there are times when I look at the news coverage and I can see, I recognize the landmarks. I recognize the street layout, and I go, I know what street that is. And there's something heavier about watching this kind of news coverage and this kind of event when this is the place you grew up, and when there are people there that that aren't just names. They're people with a history that you're part of their history and they're part of your history.
Right.
There's something heavy about that, and I think what's been impressed on me, and maybe why I'm reflective on this, is even if those people are not a part of our history, they're part of someone's history, right? They're that person you saw, and I'll just say it, like, again, I'm not making commentary on the rightness or the wrongness or the justifiedness or not justifiedness of the most recent ICE-involved shooting. But that person had a family. Like, that person that was killed was an image bearer and had a family, and he had perspectives, and he had opinions, and he was a person who, death is terrible. Like, all of those things are true, regardless of whether he made a good decision to go out that day or a foolish decision to go out that day, whether he was antagonizing ICE or whether he wasn't. Like, whatever the situation was, it's still true that he had a family who is mourning him. And he was an image bearer, and now that's done. Like, he's still an image bearer, but, like, now he's gone, and his life on earth and his history here is over. And that's a tragedy. Like, no matter how we slice it, that's a tragedy. And I guess I'm just really sick of people acting as though, and I think most people are doing this for political posturing reasons. I think people who want to paint this as though it's good versus evil and that there's only simple answers in this, they're doing it because it suits a political narrative. And I'm not even making a commentary on whether or not that's good or wise or bad. Like, that's not even the point, but that's a lot of what's driving this. And I think as Christians, we can be and should be political. I think we should be involved in politics insofar that God calls us to. There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't have the liberty to do politics the way the world does politics. If we're going to be involved in political action, whether that's formally by seeking office or whether that's informally by making commentary, we still have to be Christians while we do it. We still have to follow God's law while we do it. And that includes both the sixth commandment and the ninth commandment. All of those things are true. And I guess I'm just really frustrated seeing some Christians or some people who call themselves Christians. The only reason I say that is not to necessarily call their salvation into question. It's people who are identifying as Christians I just have no knowledge of. It's just random screen names on Twitter. Some of them are probably bots, right? But there are people who are identifying themselves as Christians who are acting as though the death of an image bearer is not a tragedy. And I can't think of a situation, even when a hardened criminal is executed, even when justice is served by the death of an individual, it's still a tragedy in like a cosmic sense. That's not how it was supposed to be. It's not God's design for humans to perish and to to cease to be. Like that's just not the way it's supposed to be. So it's heavy. I do want you to save me and get us out of this. Hopefully you've got some light, fun affirmation to get us back on track. But this has just been weighing on me, and I feel like sometimes we do have a platform and we have a responsibility to use it to make some statements to force us to grapple with these things. I mean, not like it's a huge platform. We have like 400 or 500 regular listeners. It's not like we have a big reach, but we have a reach, and I think that means we have a responsibility to.
Also, this is how you and I talk, isn't it?
It's true. That's also true.
And we're being true to the fact that we talk about the things that come up that grieve us, that hurt us, that help us to process our faith, and also our struggles in the midst of that faith.
Yeah.
To make sure that we're honoring the Lord Jesus Christ in like difficult times and difficult circumstances, of which, again, by some in almost all relative comparison, it's not that difficult for us, for you and I, except that we have to contend with these things. Everybody should. So I think when you bring it forward, you remind us of that. And I, for one, I'm grateful. So in that spirit, I don't know how my affirmation or denial could be heavier than that. Like this would take a really weird turn if I had one that was like, well, hold on, because I had like if I wade into. So, and part of maybe its lightness is I'm going to just break the rules. I'm going to do an affirmation and denial, which used to be the old school method, but the affirmation is like drive-by. You rarely notice it happens. So I'm just going to drop it real quickly. So I've spoken before about two great series by author Brandon Sanderson, who writes amazing fictions in the fantasy genre. Those two are Mistborn and Stormlight Archive. So in case you know him as an author and you've been living under a rock, I just want to say in passing that Apple TV just picked up some rights to those two series, and they're going to be making movies and television series. And I have high hopes because it's Apple, and apparently Sanderson is also going to write, produce, and consult and approve and all this stuff. So it's going to be good. So if you're not into reading, but you've heard me talk about them before, you can just wait. And if you are into reading, get super stoked, because you're going to see people like, Vin and Ellen in person, apparently. It's going to be great. So that's just a passing. Nothing else to say.
Vin and Ellen?
Yes.
Like Vin Diesel and Ellen DeGeneres are starring in the show?
No. Being the character in Ellen.
You're on like a first name basis with Vin and Ellen?
Yes. I mean, if you know, you know. If you know, you know. So you have time to read. Read Mistborn, read Stormlight Archive. It's actually, there's a lot of books, but I'm super stoked that this is going to happen. So that's a drive-by. I got to leave it there. I've already just sped past the house. So here's the real denial. I'm also going denial. It is lighter than yours, Tony, but I think that you'll agree with me, but I'm not entirely sure. So we're going to find out. So I think the best way I can summarize this denial is like the dislike or vitriol. That's too strong a word, but I'm denying against what I think is too much dislike against the cold weather. So hear me out on this. In lots of places of the world right now, it's cold. It's super cold. It's colder than average for many people. And I get that can be uncomfortable, but there's something for me where I've always found the cold to be kind of life-giving. It makes you feel alive. Like you go outside to take out the trash on a cold night. You breathe in that air, and maybe it burns your lungs a little bit. You look up at the clear sky. There's something about a beauty of the cold that I don't find the same in winter. Also, you can't get comfy in the summer, rather. You can't get comfy in the summer. It just doesn't happen. So like even now in my makeshift bedroom studio, it's a nice 61 degrees. I got a sweatshirt on. Like, I know what the temperature is in the room you're at. It's definitely
older than 61 degrees, probably.
It's around that temp, probably. So I know that it's like easy. I think it's just like easy to pick on the cold, but I think of course there's something that people say about like the fire is purifying. I don't know. I always kind of think that way about the cold. It's special. And I think there's something about leaning in and appreciating it, both like the joy then and appreciating the blessing of having someplace warm to be, but also this amazing juxtaposition of just being out in temperatures that cut you a little bit. I don't know. There's something about it. I don't get that with the heat, but what say you? Have I gone too far? Imagine.
No, I think there's a sweet spot. Like, I think I think there's a such thing as too cold. I think
What's too cold? Fahrenheit style. Sorry, we'll do the conversion to Celsius.
yeah, I'm not going to do the conversion to Celsius. This is America. I think probably like 15 to 20 degrees is the sweet spot. I think if you get much colder than that for
what I
me,
thought you'd say.
yeah, I think if you get much colder than that for me, it becomes, and maybe this is because I have kids, and so like it becomes a whole different game to try to get kids into the car when it's colder than 15 degrees. You can get away with like rushing the kid out to the car and just wrapping the jacket around them. Something people who don't have toddlers don't realize is you can't put your toddler in the car seat in a winter jacket. So like it gets to be cumbersome.
Gotta do costume change.
Yeah, and I feel like if it gets much colder than that, then the joy of being outside. I guess my threshold, and maybe it probably isn't a specific temperature, but when I take the dog out at night, if I feel like I have to put a jacket on to do that, that's when it's too cold. But I agree with you in principle that there's something refreshing about standing outside when it's crisp and cold, not just cool, but cold. Something about the alertness of your nerves, and like there's something that just like wakes you up in a really nice way that you don't get in the heat. I feel like in like converse heat, so like I think maybe the equivalent of 15 degrees, if I was talking about when it's too hot, would be like 90, 95 degrees would feel the same, like would be on the same end of the spectrum. You don't walk out and go, it's 95. Like you walk out and you feel oppressed. You feel like it's heavy on your shoulders. It drains you of your life. I feel like cold, there's a sweet spot. There is no sweet spot where like it gets so hot that you feel great about it. So I think I feel you in principle. I'm not sure. I guess maybe maybe there's a sweet spot for you too. Like I don't think we're not talking like negative 60 degrees air temperature or something like that. But yeah, I think I'm with you.
Yeah, but I am, I think, talking about a little bit of like cold face slapping. You know what I mean? I mean, there's something famously about the heat where once you get out in it, there's not much you can do if it is oppressive. So, if you're going out, you're exercising or just out and about, it's not like you can like strip down entirely. And even then you might not be comfortable. Right. Obviously, where the cold is a little bit different. Hopefully you can prepare yourself. You can put on more clothes. I'm with you. I don't know what that temperature would be for me, but it's just funny around here. It's every kind of interaction ends with the stay warm out there, will you? Like, I guess we do that in the heat as well, but sometimes I'm like, no, it's okay to feel what you feel. And it's nice to have the seasons of cold. I don't know if I would like living in a place where it didn't get at least a little bit once in a while shockingly cold, because there's something beautiful about that shock. So I think 15 is fine. I'm with you. That's maybe the right for all of our like continental listeners, those out in the rest of the world, that's -9 degrees Celsius. So, take that for what you will, but it's okay. I guess I'm saying it's okay. We can just be like, you know what? It's cold, but it might be good for us. Does that make sense?
I think on a totally different temperature related bit here, I think we should stop saying that it is 20 degrees, and instead we should say every time it's 12 degrees below the temperature at which saline freezes at sea level, or whatever the weird calculation is that makes 32 degrees freezing instead of 0 degrees. I joke about like this being America, but like the Fahrenheit scale is whacked out and crazy. It makes no sense.
It's wild.
It makes sense in the laboratory setting that it was created in, but like it just doesn't make any sense from like just a logical human beings think this way perspective. But I think I'm with you. I guess maybe where my head is at is like, when it's like -10 degrees, and I'm not talking about wind chill. Actually, I think -10 degrees air temperature when there's no wind is probably not all that uncomfortable. Like really, like I feel like I would not feel totally uncomfortable just walking out to the mail. Like I wouldn't put a jacket on to run out to the mailbox and grab the mail if it was 10 degrees below 0 and there was no wind. But whatever it is, like when you're at a low temperature and then you come back up a little bit, your body's like, like you can tolerate that. I feel like when it's 105 degrees and then it drops to 95 degrees, there's not that same effect where you're like, like that my favorite part of the season. This is like super nerdy, total like Northerner Yankee talk. My favorite part of the season is that first, like, we had it in January this year, but like that first period of time where it pops back up into the mid 20s and everybody is like wearing shorts and a t-shirt for like 2
Yeah,
days.
right.
Or like people are driving home with their windows rolled down on their car because it like, that's like when you open your house to get all the like winter stale air out. That's my favorite part of the season. Maybe that's what I'm talking about with you, but I think I'm with you. I think the cold is refreshing in a really kind of organic way. It wakes you up in a good way.
I agree. I think maybe it's okay and maybe we need it. And I've thought about that a lot. Isn't it strange, but also endearing that the way that we feel the temperature, the way that we actually experience it is relative to the season? Because, you
Yeah.
might have like, if it was like 61, 62 in your house in like the dead of August, you'd be like, man, so refreshing. But in winter, you're prone to say, ooh, there's a little nip in the air, and it's like, well, same temperature. It's just that like you're oriented, all of your experience is oriented right now to your seasonal reality and circumstances. So I think I love temperature change. So I also would say maybe just growing up in New England, I much prefer the cold than the heat. I mean,
Yeah.
oppressive heat where it feels like you're inside a dog's mouth to me is in no way preferable or has hegemony over going outside in the -10. So
Yeah.
I enjoy it, loved ones, wherever you're at, just enjoy it.
Yeah. I also think it's funny how you talk about temperature being relative or the experience of temperature being relative because, it's winter, we're trying to save money, like fuel oil is crazy expensive in New England and
Right.
all of the fuel oil in this area comes from Canada, so there's all the tariff stuff going on. And so I'm trying to keep trying to keep our thermostat down. And so I have it set to like 63 at night, which is lower than I think I would have set it in the past. And I remember like the other day, I was up in the middle of the night with one of the kids and I was like, oh man, it's so cold in here. And I looked at the thermostat and I was like, wait a second, like I set my air conditioner to 63 in the summer and I
Right.
keep my room I keep our
Right.
bedroom that cool. It's a
Right.
small bedroom. We have a nice air conditioner. So we keep a room that cool. But in the winter, that feels cold and I'm trying to turn up the heat. There's something theological there too, something about not being satisfied. Maybe there's an argument for dissatisfaction, like C.S. Lewis style. There's an argument that because we can never be comfortable with the temperature, there must therefore be a heaven where temperature is perfect or something like that.
Actually, that's pretty good. That's better than could come up with. I was going to go the direction of like the rare jewel of contentment, like
There you go.
Puritan style. Obviously, that's the best segue we're going to get into our conclusion of Luke chapter 15 and this thrice baked parable of lostness. And we're going to talk about the Father. So I'm just going to take us right there. Ready, everybody? We're speeding ahead. We're just going to go right to verse 18 because I think it's good for us to put in our ears again just the end of this parable so we can see and hear this interaction of the Father with his two sons. And I'm going to advance us to the point where the first son has gone away. He squandered all his living. He comes to himself. And so then he has this little conversation while he's, presumably with the pigs looking at the pods that they eat that he wishes he could as well. He says, I will rise up and go to my father, and I'll say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired men. So he rose up and he came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fattened calf and slaughter it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and has come to life again. He was lost and he's been found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. And summoning one of the servants, he began inquiring what these things could be. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has received him back safe and sound. But he became angry and was not wanting to go in. And his father came out and began pleading with him. But he answered and said to his father, look, for so many years I've been serving you, and never have I neglected a command of yours, and yet never have you given me a young goat, so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your wealth with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him. And he said to him, child, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But when we had to celebrate and rejoice, for this brother of yours was dead and is alive, and was lost and has been found.
Yeah. I think it's important, we're kind of going to jump in here and really focus on the father. And we made the point last week that this parable really probably is about the older son. Like the punchline of this parable is about the older son because it's a parable that's told in response to the Pharisees to shame them for acting like the older brother. So even though the rest of the parable exists, the main point of the parable is probably found in this lack of rejoicing over the lost brother who was found. And that lines up with the main point of the other two parables in this sort of triplet of parables is the rejoicing element, right? There's the shepherd who rejoices when he finds his lost sheep, the angels in heaven that rejoice. They're not part of the parable, but it's explained that the angels will rejoice. And then this woman who rejoices over her lost coin and invites all her friends over to do the same. The flip side of this, yes, the parable has a lot to say about how the father rejoices, how he throws this big feast. But the punchline of this parable is that the older son refused to come in. And so it's painting this picture of like, there's these two parables where the only logical answer is to rejoice. And then there's this parable where it seems like, yeah, the only logical answer is to rejoice. And then there's this totally irrational, insane reaction of the older brother to not rejoice. But all of that said, that only functions, like that punchline only works if you also understand the setup. I don't know if you've ever had this happen, Jesse, where you're trying to tell a story that has kind of a funny punchline, or you're
Right.
telling a sort of a narrative joke, and either you miss something in the setup or the person doesn't get something in the setup, and so the joke just doesn't land, or the story just doesn't
Right.
have the impact
Sure.
it's supposed to. And I think like that's kind of where we're at on this. Is yes, we've talked about the punchline, and that is the punchline, but we can't fully understand the impact on the insanity of the older brother's response
Right.
if we don't understand the grace that the father shows both to the younger son, which we talked a lot about, and to the older son, which we've also talked a lot about. But understanding the nature of the father beyond just like his response, I think is really vital, and that's where we're going to go tonight.
Yeah, I think that's really good setup. There's this posture of the father, this watchful mercy, which is for both of his children, for the son that's away, and also for the son that's at home. He notices them both, one coming, one missing. And so I find it interesting that, like you said, the father's compassion is described even before the first son finishes his rehearsed confession. And it's clear then we're seeing that God's mercy is not hired by repentance. Repentance is like this appointed pathway by which mercy is received, and it's extended to both of the children in a way. And so in the first, the father's seeing and running really portrays clearly for us that divine initiative. Not that the son is contributing some kind of merit, but the father's already disposed to welcome the returning sinner. And he's already disposed to welcome his angry older son into the fray. It's almost a warning, as if to say, similar maybe to what Cain receives, like sin is crouching at the door, it desires to master over you. Don't go this way. Don't do this thing. Come and enjoy, come and celebrate. But you're right. The whole setup is in the father's posture. And then, of course, like coheres with that wider biblical portrait of God's fatherly compassion, that he's a father that shows compassion to his children, that the ones he loves, he shows, or the ones that love him, rather, he shows grace and blessing and mercy to 1,000 generations while only punishing the next several contiguous generations, that he's loved us with an everlasting kind of lavish love. So there's this emphasis right from the beginning, which I think is setting up that punchline, that the father's compassion is free and it's prior. It's rooted in God's character, not in the sinner's performance here. And they're both sinners. That's clear. So you're right. It's almost like maybe we should see it coming. Maybe they should have seen it coming, but that is all necessary to get to the end result where you get the big kind of gotcha moment.
Yeah. And I think too, we rightfully look at the response of the father to the younger son's return as sort of like the locus classicus of the father's character here, right? The seminal moment in this interaction. But we and we're even doing this tonight, right? We started at verse 18, but we start to see glimpses of the father's character earlier in the parable.
Yes.
Right. So first of all, the parable is the punchline of the parable is about the older son and the older son's response. But the parable starts out saying there was a man, and the man is not one of the sons. There was a man who had two sons.
Right.
So this is a parable that starts by describing this father as one who had two sons. And then we see in the response of the father to this younger son's request, already there's an act of grace, right? And we've kind of made this comment that this is sort of like a lesson in systematic theology, in soteriology baked into this parable. But like the fact that the father doesn't reject the son's request to divide up the inheritance early. I've read a lot of commentaries on this that would say like the request of the son was so audacious and disrespectful that like in Israel, it would have been appropriate for this father to bring him up basically on like capital charges and have him executed,
Correct.
like Leviticus style. And I don't know whether that's all true or not. Like there's a lot of speculation that has to happen with those kinds of cultural extrapolations. But in either case, this father would have been well within his rights. And again, like we've made the point, like this isn't necessarily a lesson in great parenting. But the father would have been well within his rights to laugh the son out of his room and be like, of course, I'm not dividing up your inheritance. Like I'm still living. I still need this to live on. But he doesn't. He grants the request. And this is a little bit of speculation, I think. But what motivation would there be to grant this request other than loving his son and not wanting to have this relational disruption, right? This father starts off this parable by granting this son's request at great cost to himself, right? We've mentioned it in the inheritance laws. The older son gets 2/3 of the estate, and so the younger son or the older son gets a double portion. So if we assume that there are only two sons, which it says he had two sons, we don't have any reason to think there's more in view, then the younger son is leaving with a full third of this man's estate, and has to be a third of the estate that he can take with him. So whatever he's granted in this request to give him his property, he's taking all, at least a third of this man's liquid assets, probably more than a third of his liquid assets, with him. That's a huge, huge amount of your own personal assets that go with you. And he just does it. He just does it. And I think this paints a picture for us of, again, we have to be theologically careful. God does not suffer loss when we depart from him, right? It doesn't affect God in a absolute proper sense when sinners, are distant from him. But there is a reality that this father in the parable grants his son's request, a foolish request, and I think he probably understood it was a foolish request. He grants him this request at great cost to himself. And how often do we depart from our father at great cost? I'm doing air quotes if you're not watching this on the video. At great cost to our Heavenly Father, in that we now reach communion with him. Or if we're not regenerate Christians and we persist in our sin, like his image is marred. His image is marred in creation. His glory is not proclaimed by an image bearer that still has the same chief end that all the rest of us do, which is to glorify God and enjoy him forever. There's an accommodated language analogical loss that the father suffers when that happens. That's a picture of what's going on in this parable as well.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right on. I mean, there's like you're drawing us, I think, back to this juxtaposition between this kind of open, gratuitous rebellion of the first son without like us appropriately appreciating the more like subtle rebellion that's equally sinful of the second.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. And that's really what God is addressing in here. He comes for both. The Father comes for both in his own way. Can we, since we're talking about the Father, can we talk about a pet peeve of mine I have with some interpretation of this? And you can tell me whether you agree, disagree. Okay. So it's
Peeve all the pets.
It's about the running. There's a lot about the running. And I think a lot of it is good. Some of it might be like going too far, but I understand. Let's just put out there. We can all agree that in that culture, a dignified patriarch running is like socially beneath him. I get all that.
Right.
What I find though interesting is I see a difference here in how we describe it. There's some I think that would describe that as like undignified. I
Right.
don't see it this way. It's not like David style, like I'll become even more undignified than this. I will, tie up my robe and I will go running and I'll embarrass myself or my son. What I think we have to understand, or at least as I'm interpreting it, is the difference between like condescension and not indecorum. So in this parable, I don't think this is embarrassment. It is a condescending love. It's God's willingness to cross the distance that our sin has created. And that fits. We know that. I think we should pull in all the rest of the Old Testament where God is repeatedly describing it as kind of like stooping to save, whether that's he's buoying Israel up as a man carries his son, or God's compassion grows warm, like from Hosea. But I don't see this as indecorum. I see it as condescension. And I think that's worth mentioning.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. I think whether it's this or there are other parables where this happens where like people extrapolate, and I guess maybe I did this just now just a little bit, so I'm not like bashing on people too much, but I think we can make way too much out of a somewhat speculative
Sure.
point. Like I said, like, do we know for sure that this request to divide the inheritance would have been a capital offense?
Right.
I don't think so. Do we have a record of a child asking to have their inheritance early and then being put to death? I don't think so. None of the commentaries that I've read point to an actual account of that happening. And I think this is probably like the same thing. Like, yeah, I guess like the head of a family, and like, yes, all of the commentaries that I've read that make this point talk about how like you'd have to gird your loins and
Yep.
like there's almost like a level of exposure
Of
that
course.
happens when you have to do
Right.
that. Like,
Right.
okay, but I think I'm with you that even if that's in play here, it's not really a point that the parable is making.
Right.
The point that the parable is making is that the love of this father drives him to exert himself and close that distance. Whether that's a condescension, like we might talk about it theologically, or whether it is a sort of like a self abasement or a self effacement. I don't know, but I also don't know that it matters that much. That's not really the point. And I think when I think about this as a dad, this makes so much sense to me too. Like my kid does something that is obnoxious and is so frustrating, and I'm so angry. And then sometimes he looks at me and he goes, "Daddy, I'm sorry." And it's all gone, like it's all gone in a second. Like it really is most of the time. Like, and there is something about this that I guess let me put it this way. I have such a tough time thinking that being a dad has emotionally changed so much in the last 2000 years that the natural instincts of fatherhood that God gives us are so different now that any father would not run to their child who is returning. Like this man, I think when it's said at the end that your brother who was dead is now alive, like I
Right.
don't think that that is an exaggeration.
Right.
I think the assumption made in this family, in the context of this parable, is that when this son left, they were never going to see him again because this was a foolish decision.
Right.
They knew what he was going to do with the money. They knew he was going to run out of the money. And in the ancient world, when you're in a far country and you've got no money, you don't have a lot of prospects. Even the men
Right.
in the world, all that's made about like the social difficulties of widowed and orphaned women in the ancient world. Like, yeah, but like a single dude out in some far country in the middle of a famine with no family support structure is going to starve to death. So
Right.
I think when I see this interpretations that make this running movement towards the sun to be somehow unexpected or unusual or something along those lines, they don't resonate with me.
I mean, either.
I don't know that they really ever have resonated with me, but they just don't resonate with me. And I think this sort of like he committed this action that's sort of semi shameful.
Yes. Right.
That's almost like
Right.
I just don't buy it. That doesn't seem like the shocking part of the parables. Usually have kind of a shocking element to them. this does not seem like the shocking element to me.
I agree. And if we take this and say, well, he's done something really embarrassing, and that's what shows the love, because he's so degraded himself, then what are we really saying about God if he's meant to be, even in an emblematic way, a representation of God? Like, that's problematic. I think, though, I'm with you in tracking with what you're saying, though I don't have children myself. I'm just considering, if you could put yourself in the place of that father, or just imagine yourself, like you're out carrying groceries in one day, and at the end of your driveway, you see a person you never thought you'd see again, or a friend you haven't seen in so long, or somebody in broken relationship that you really thought you'd never see. I'm guessing what would happen is you would just turn on your heels, get on your getaway sticks, and you would run toward them. You wouldn't in that moment think like, this is going to be embarrassing, but the embarrassment is worth it. You would just go. You drop the groceries. You'd let the milk sit there. You would just take off. And
Yeah.
that's what shows this love. It is like a condescension to just to move and to go, because like you said, to your point, if he anticipated that his son might have been gone from this world, then I'm not sure if he was sitting by the window every day, just kind of melancholy looking out, with his hand resting on, or his head resting on his hand, but instead was probably doing something and turned and saw him and just went. And that was it. And it was a reaction born out of the purest kind of love and condescension that would just go. I think then that's what flows into this whole response of like the kiss and the reconciliation before negotiation. The son expects to bargain. Just make me like one of your hired servants. But the father's embrace like interrupts the whole process. And of course, it just keeps showing us that this reconciliation for both the older and the younger son, it's not a wage. For both of them, it's not a wage. It's a gift. And the father, what I find really interesting in both of their cases, he doesn't deny the sin. Like you're saying, he says, this son of mine was dead, which I think is both literal and figurative.
Yeah.
The sense that he was like cast outside. He was outside of himself, outside of the family, outside of the kingdom. But what he does deny is the son's proposed status downgrade. Now, grace always restores sonship. And so I think the parable here is resisting like two errors at once that you and I have talked about a lot, which would be kind of this like weird, like lukewarm antinomian sentimentality. Like sin doesn't matter, right? People like do what you want. It's all good. The father calls it death and lostness. And you kind of compare that against like legalism. Like, well, you have to earn your way back. It's good enough to, have grace and mercy, but you have to do something to accept it. You have to elevate yourself to the place of the deserving poor. You have to come forward with empty hands. The father restores before the son can even offer terms.
Yeah.
So in both ways, the father is going out. In one way, there's damage that's already been done through the youngest son. But in the other way, I see it for the oldest son, the father's basically saying, don't do this. Please don't do this. And what I think is the most telling in that way is at the very end of this chapter, in the last phrase that we have, the father says, but we had to celebrate and rejoice. Not but like me and the family. Like he pulls him in inclusively already and says, you ought to be celebrating, which of course is that like rock hard, sharp-witted, like fiery tongue that's coming against the scribes and the Pharisees. But the father is condescending. He's not embarrassed by any of this.
Yeah.
He's condescending and proud, I think, to show his love. And again, I think any of one of us would get on our getaway sticks and run. And like you're saying, that is just the shadow. That's the argument from the lesser to the greater. So how much more, again, do we see this father pushing us against antinomian behavior and also against legalism? It's all right there for us.
Yeah. And, I think too, maybe to just put an exclamation point on this whole little train of thought we have here. The father is not like, I think these interpretations that have this running out and embracing him to be some really unexpected, unusual, semi-shameful act. I think they just miss some of like the immediate context, right? So the father arises, while the son was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed to him. The son said, Father, I've sinned against you before heaven and earth, and I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. The father said to his servants, right? They didn't walk back to the village. They didn't walk back to the house. The picture is that like the servants ran right after the father. Like everybody recognizes that this son is back and is alive. When the son, the older son, is coming in from the field, it's not the father that he asks what happened. The servant says, your brother's come home. He's been received back safe and sound. Everybody is celebrating. And it's not just that the servants are happy to have a free meal and a, a better some dancing and some wine. Like everybody is celebrating. And so this idea that like the celebration, the running to, the embracing element of this is somehow unusual, that totally contradicts the fact that the older son's response is like that's the insane response in the parable.
Right. Preach.
Right. The sane expected response that everybody has is overjoyed, just elation that this lost son has come home, except this boneheaded older brother who refuses to come in and celebrate. So I think that, and we could even talk about the context of the father. Like the father has created this household with these servants where they're excited, they're happy, right? And like, let's not put too fine a point on it. If these are slaves, which we have no reason to think they're not, like slavery was a reality in the ancient world, these are slaves, their livelihood and their existence depends on the livelihood and existence of this father, of this landowner. He gives away a third of it. Their meals are getting leaner too. So they have every reason to be frustrated and angry with this older son as well. But they're not. How amazing of a context of a family, of a household has this father created, where even the servants who are there are rejoicing over the return of the son.
Right.
The one person who doesn't rejoice, the one person where we should be surprised is not excited, is the older son. And I think that in itself says a lot about this father. And the other point I wanted to make is there is an element of almost like the older son's response. I just talked about how that's the insane response. It's almost like the father is surprised by it. Right. He goes out and he's like, "What do you mean you're not excited?" Like he's shocked, sort of shocked that this son is not willing to come in and rejoice. And it's almost like it catches him off guard when his older son says, "You've never even given me a young goat."
Right.
Because he's like, "What are you talking about? Everything I have is yours." Like it doesn't even register with him that he had to offer that a young goat. Like it's almost like you didn't even have to ask. Like you didn't even have to ask. It's already yours. You wanted a young goat to have a party with your friends. Like the flock is yours. Just take the young goat. There's this sense of sadness and surprise and betrayal almost in the words of the father of, "I'm always with you. You are always with me, and all that's mine is yours. What do you mean you're not going to celebrate? Because all that's mine is yours, including this son who's come back. He's also yours, and you're not willing to celebrate." So I think there's so much in this parable about God's nature too. We often treat God as though he sort of grudgingly saved us. And I think in a lot of theological circles, this takes the form of kind of like pitting the son against the father, like the God the son against God the father, in the idea that like the son placated the father. And so like because the father was wrathful and angry, and so Jesus had to come down and die, and now the father can love us. The reality is that the love of the father, the love of God the Father, is the motivating factor that drives the plan of redemption, right? And it's the same love of the Son and the same love of the Spirit. But in the most famous verse in the Bible, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only son," that's God the Father it's talking about.
Right.
So it's God the Father's love that drives the whole plan of salvation. The whole covenant of redemption is initiated in light of the Father's love for the elect. It's not as though he was some frustrated, angry deity and his son somehow got the better of him and placated him. And that's exactly what we see in this parable. There is never a point in the parable where there's anything shown by the father except for love for his people, including the servants. I mean, in a real sense, the celebration is not like, "All right, servants, get out of here. I'm going to have a fatted calf with my son who's come back."
Right.
The celebration is for the whole household. So this tells us so much about God's nature. What's that old quote the Puritans say is, wrath is God's alien work, right?
Yes.
It's not to say that wrath is somehow outside of God or it's contrary to God, but it is his alien work. It's his work, but it's work that is sort of opposed to his natural inclination. I mean, that's a really risky way to talk about it, but it's sort of like it's alien to God in a sense because it's alien to God's intention for the world.
Right.
God's intention was, and again, it's so hard to even talk about this stuff. So I'm just going to say it, people. We got 480 episodes of us
You
getting
know
really
us.
precise technical theology of impassibility and inseparable operations. Like, just
Right.
hear this in that context. It is God's intention. It was God's intention, right? It was not the way it was supposed to be that Adam fell. God knew it was going to happen. It was part of his decree. It was part of his plan, but it also was not the way it was supposed to be. And I know those two statements are contradictory, but I think you guys understand what I'm getting at. Because humans fell and that was not the way they were intended to be, God's wrath towards sin, which was never intended, is alien to his sort of inclinations. Again, I think
Yes.
it's really hard to talk about this stuff.
No, I
But
got you.
the father in this parable has no wrath to speak of.
Right.
Like, that's the crazy part about this parable. He
Right.
has no wrath to speak of. He shows no wrath to the older son. He shows no wrath to the younger son. He has nothing but gracious disposition and an intention to redeem and rescue his children. And that's amazing.
Right. It's not like wrath is foreign to God. I agree with you. I think what you said, I think, was fine, because this is something we hold in tension. But we're all saying that it is like alien to his primary disposition, but it's not foreign to him. So, like you said, the father is going out everywhere. It's all active volitional love. He goes out to the younger, goes out to the elder. And in the former, the father's purpose is not only to just restore the prodigals, but also to unmask the elder brother's slavery to wages, status, resentment. And it's a good reminder for all of us that legalism is not obedience. It's a
Right.
different kind of lostness. But the great encouragement is in both of those lostness is that Jesus comes running, he comes out, he comes to restore, he comes in mercy first to say, come it back into the kingdom. And that lostness of self-righteousness and distance from the Father's heart is equally savable, though it might look like it's some kind of respectable rebellion. It's not. And the point here, I think, again, like when he gets to Jesus telling the story, and again, we got to remember he's telling it. When he says, like, we had to celebrate, I wonder if he's looking in the eyes of the scribes and Pharisees, because he basically like, we, all of us had to celebrate. Are you not celebrating? Now, all I can think of is like Gladiator when he's like, are you not entertained? Do you know what I mean? Like, are
Yeah.
we not celebrating? What's happening here in the kingdom of God where sinners are being restored, where the down and out, the downtrodden and the marginalized and the pariahs are coming back in and finding relief and restoration and redemption. Are we not celebrating? I think that's like the high calling, the exalted finale of this whole part of Luke 15. And there is an emphasis, especially Reformed theology, which is right. Everything you just said, God's saving disposition is grounded in God's own will and love. It's not extracted from kind of like human improvement or point of view or perspective. And that matters for Luke 15 because the parable can always be misread as God loves you once you come back.
Right.
But the father's running corrects this. He's going out to the elder son, corrects us in this. Let me just read from Ephesians chapter 1, starting at verse 4. Just as God chose us in him before the foundation of the world, that we would be holy and blameless before him in love, by predestining us to adoption as sons through Jesus Christ to himself, according to the pleasure of his good will, to the praise and the glory of his grace, which he graciously bestowed on us in the beloved. That's it.
Yeah. 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 I don't think there's anything better to say than that. This is, it's funny. We could continue. I mean, we make this joke all the time, but it's not even a joke here. Like, we could continue to talk about this parable for many more weeks. We're not going to. I know, like, some people get a little bit of fatigue when we're going really deep diving in this, and I get that. But there's so much here to unpack. So we're going to keep marching through the parables. We're not totally done with this little trio of parables. Because if you remember, I don't even remember when it was. If you remember way back, like 3 months ago, we were working our way through Matthew. We hadn't even got out of the first chapter of parables in Matthew when we had to jump over to Luke because of the way that it worked out. But Matthew uses these parables, not the parable of the father, son, whatever, not this parable, but the parable of the lost sheep and the coins. He uses that for a different reason. So we're going to come back to those a little bit. We're going to talk about that a little bit next week. And then we're going to keep plugging along. So you're not so far into this series that if this is your first episode and you want to go back and catch up, you can do that. There's not a huge amount of episodes, set aside a work week worth of hours to go and listen to it. You can trim that down if you can listen at a couple times speed. But we got a long way to go. So jump in with us, grab your commentaries. Next week, we're going to be back in Matthew 13, I think it was. We're going to be talking about the lost sheep and the lost coin and why it is that Matthew positions it differently than Luke does. So I'm excited about that. This is actually something that's been bubbling up in my head for a long time. So I'm excited to get it out. Then we're going to keep plugging along in the parables. We're going to keep going primarily in Matthew, but we'll jump in other places when it's appropriate. And we're going to keep going until we finish them all. It's like the Pokemon version of podcasting. You got to catch them all. And it's the parables instead of, little Pokemon creatures.
Catch them all. I'm not trying to be that guy, honest, but just in case people are tracking with us, because we don't want the commentary, it's Matthew 18. That's what we hanging out. 18. I mean, the 8 and the 3 look pretty close. So I think you're right on. And remember, I'm just picturing now like this is a game show. Like game shows sometimes have that like antiphonal, like there's a question at some point in the game show. I think everybody's going to remember the question, like, does it parallel? So going to be going to not just like one version of this, but the different versions. And the reason why I think we've been like pretty dutiful at trying to set up what we think is like a groundwork by deliberately choosing one of the gospels to like kind of center us. And then we're going to be going around that because Matthew 18, while it is the same parallel, like you and I were just talking about before we started recording, it does have some different perspective for us to take away from it. And so this is the beauty. We really can't get to the fun of the parallelism. Like it's no fun, or it's not quite as good or effective to like do them side by side in real time. It's much better, I think, for us to sink in, to process, and then to say like, okay, we just went through a lot of the great, beautiful details here. What is this other version of the same thing tell us, or what are we picking up that even if it's like perspective or approach that was slightly different from the first version that we looked at? That's the whole joy. So don't like skip the next one. It's not going to be the same conversation. It's actually going to be a remarkably different conversation. And speaking of conversation, Tony, people want to get in touch with you, or they want to get in touch with me, if they want to talk about what's going around the world or converse with us about the theology that we're speaking of here. If you're new to Reformed theology and you think, I might like to talk to somebody about that, though we're not experts and not your pastor, what you should do is what? How can you find us?
You can join our Telegram chat. We have a little corner of the internet that we've carved out. There's lots of great Christians in there, Reformed brothers and sisters. So it's not even just like come talk to Jesse and Tony. There's a whole group of people that love the Lord and love Reformed theology. You can go to t.me, the letter t.me/Reformed Brotherhood. And that will point you either to download a little app to use, or if you already have Telegram, which is the messaging app we use, it'll jump you right in there. There's lots of prayer requests going on, conversations about books people are reading. Today there was a conversation about whether or not the things leading up to the eating of the forbidden fruit were actually sin, or whether they were some other category of sort of like moral neglect, which is an interesting, sort of theological conversation. But most of all, like, it's just a place for us to fellowship with each other. It's not a replacement for your church. It can never be a replacement for your church, but it is a place where you can have some good, genuine fellowship and some good, fun times with other people who love the Lord.
I love it. So come hang out with us. And if you don't, you can always come back here, because until the Lord comes, if he tarries another week, we will be back here talking about Matthew 18 and lostness all over again, because there's some new stuff in there for us to explore and enjoy. So until next time, if you got it, go out in the cold. And while you're there, honor everyone.
Love that brotherhood.
What if I'm far from home? Oh, brother, I would hear you call. What if I lose it all? Oh, sister, I would help you out. If the sky comes falling down for you, there's nothing in this world I wouldn't